The Justice Beat is dedicated to the 1 in 3 Americans touched by incarceration. Justice Beat is where we discuss all things justice.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Justice Beat radio show. And we'd like to welcome our internet radio audience to the Justice Beat radio show. There are many storytelling organizations, but Story for All is unique in harnessing the power of story to heal. A story for all, the focus is not just the story itself, but on the healing and transformation that storytelling can achieve. In recognition of the power of story to address the rifts in our society and give voices to the unheard, Story for All was founded in 2011 in order to bring the power of storytelling to communities in need. Formerly known as Story Bridges, Story for All is an educational nonprofit 501c3. We are pleased to have on the Justice Beat radio show Ms. Angela Zussman, founder and executive director of Story for All. Welcome to the Justice Beat show, Ms. Zussman.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, all the way from Oakland, California.
Woo-hoo.
Our first segment, we're going to delve right into, and we're going to be discussing the topic today of reframing the narrative about communities of color through storytelling. And Ms. Zussman, I'd like for you to give us a little bit of your background. How did you come to develop an interest in telling the stories of marginalized communities?
That's a great question. It's something I think about a lot. You know, I was born naturally just very curious, okay. So I've always been real interested in people's stories, to the point of nosiness, perhaps, you know, asking people questions, really wanting to know more about them. So that's just, I think, part of my personality, is just really wanting to know more from people about their stories in their lives. A big part of my storytelling journey, when I graduated from college, I spent the next 10 years working my way around the world. And I lived and visited over 50 countries, you know, on all the continents besides Antarctica. And I shared stories with people from all walks of life. And this was my true education. It was through listening to people's stories, and really people from all walks of life, that I got to appreciate what was unique about each individual, as well as ultimately really seeing that we're all the same. We humans are all the same in so many ways. And when we can take the time to listen to each other's stories, something magical and very human happens.
So why are you so passionate about the framework of storytelling itself?
You know, again, it's something almost magical to me. Humans have been sharing stories as long as we've been humans. It's the way that our brain operates. I mean, I've had the experience of the power of storytelling. I think all of us have. So having had that experience, I went in and did a lot of research about the neuroscience of story and what is literally happening in our brains and in our bodies as stories are being shared. And sure enough, in that research, I was able to see a scientific underpinning for what it was that I was experiencing. I mean, literally, when I tell you a story, you don't just hear my story, you also feel it. Your entire brain engages with what I'm telling you, and that story becomes yours. So storytelling is the only way that we humans have of literally giving other people our experience. So it's a transfer not just of knowledge, but also of experience, emotion, wisdom that ultimately leads to people feeling very connected to one another, deepening their understanding, and often deepening their respect. So I'm very interested in that mechanism that allows human beings to get in touch with their own value, the value of others, and really be in that sacred space of connection. So storytelling for me is a mechanism by which that can happen.
Storytelling. So as I listen to you describe that, I'm imagining what it would take for the individual who is listening to really be a full participant in the listening of that storytelling and embracing all aspects of the story that is being told.
that's also something I've become really fascinated by. A lot of people who do storytelling work are really looking at the telling of the story itself and the storyteller, which obviously is key. I'm also really interested in the listener. What is happening for the listener? And I can tell you a story that kind of illustrates a big aha moment for me. It was a project that I worked on years ago. In Oakland, there's a really thriving Chinatown. And so I was doing an oral history of the Oakland Chinatown. And for this project, we had a group of teenagers that I was training in oral history, and they were interviewing elders to get their stories of Chinatown. And in this one situation, there was a young guy who was conducting an interview. I think he was about 15 years old, Caucasian, Jewish, and he was interviewing an elder Japanese man. So when he stepped into the interview, this young man really didn't feel that much in common with this older gentleman. After listening to his story, he came out, his eyes were, as big as balloons. He was like, oh my God, listening to that man's story, I felt so much in common with him. He was interned in this camp, and my family was also interned in concentration camps. There's so much now I want to go back and ask my grandparents because of listening to this other gentleman. So I think maybe that's an example of how the listening can really open doors for you and help you to see things in a new way and give you different ideas about how to perceive and look at your own life and environment.
Right, because sometimes we're not necessarily listening to be changed. We're listening to speak. And when we're not fully engaged, we're sitting on the edge of our seats waiting to be able to say something as opposed to letting the moment dictate the response.
Indeed. That is entirely true. Really learning how to listen is a lifelong journey for me, and it's something that we spend a lot of time on in our programs, is encouraging people to listen. And what do you do? How do you show someone that you're listening? What is the impact when someone can really feel that you are listening to them? That's where a lot of the healing comes in, particularly with folks that we're working with in marginalized communities that are just not used to being listened to.
Right.
Just the opposite.
Right.
So when we create an environment where we can really listen respectfully to these people, it's often an extremely transformative experience in and of itself.
Right. And, I'm thinking, as you're talking about this, it reminds me of the executions that were planned in Arkansas and a few that occurred actually on Monday evening. And as I took time to read through the many, many narratives that were being posted online about some of the horrific life stories of these men when they were once children, I was concerned at the lack of inquiry through the legal system in which a lot of that information on the social impacts of their individual lives was not introduced into their cases. And I'm just thinking about how listening, making that inquiry and being intentional about listening might have, perhaps, could have changed some of the outcomes. We have to be intentional about inquiring of others. So when you mentioned that, it made me think about some of my own reflections on some of these cases that have been discussed in the news this week. What are the components of storytelling that enriches the shaping of new narratives, thus replacing old narratives?
Well, I think listening, of course, is a big part of it, and being willing to dig deep. Not just being satisfied with the same story over and over again. For example, we work a lot with young men of color, and specifically with African American young men. And if you just listen to the narrative about African American young men and believe it and don't question it, then you're going to approach African American young men in a certain way. And this is true for everybody. I just did a story circle with some fantastic, amazing young men last week, and we asked them the question, how do you think African American young men are perceived? And they shot out this list of almost completely negative words. Mm-hmm. Because of the stories that are told about young men of color, this is how they feel that they are perceived. And they're right, because a lot of people don't look past that story.
Right.
Similar to the criminals that you were speaking about, or those folks who are incarcerated. You know, they have a bigger story beyond the crime that they committed. Of course, the crime is an important story, and of
Absolutely.
course it touches many people. And there's more to the story than that. So when we take time to dig deeper, to question the prevailing narrative, then we can really begin to understand the context, the fullness of the situation, the fullness of the individual, and not be so apt to be stuck on stereotypes. And another big part of this, too, is that narratives are weaponized purposefully. Narratives are a wonderful tool for oppressing people.
Absolutely.
They're just so powerful for that. In the same way that narratives and stories help heal, they also can really help hold people down.
Yes.
So I want to just point out that there is a very conscious negative narrative campaign that we need to question and ultimately overturn.
And you know, that, I'm going to hold you to that. That can be a follow-up to this particular show, because I think that topic is very rich and contextually will take us a good hour to discuss. I'm in 100% agreement with you. So you got to make me a promise to come back and do a follow-up show.
Okay, got it.
And okay, so you mentioned you had a listening circle last week. And as you can see, sometimes some of my questions spring up organically based on just the context of our discussion today. Tell me a little bit about your story circle, your listening circle last week.
Right, so the Story Circle, we actually are doing a series of them in middle schools and high schools around Oakland, about 2, because we'll be working not just with young men, but also young women, which is great because they're also impacted by these negative stereotypes. Basically, the intention of these Story Circles is kind of a quick immersion in story and a quick immersion allowing these young people to think about the perceptions that people have about them and then reframe how they want to show themselves to the world. Right, like this is a story that's being told about you. What story do you want to tell about yourself? What's your role in articulating that story, and how can we help you promote that story so that people feel empowered to control their own narrative instead of maybe being unconscious of the prevailing narrative or feeling hopeless, which is certainly possible given the extent of negative stories and perceptions that are out there.
And I'm curious, in your effort to help them promote a new narrative, is there ever any focus and or opportunity to have these participants maybe do a contrast and comparison? So this is what you say and this is how you want to be seen and perceived. But do you ever get into issues of what is projected or things that they may have control of in order to help change that narrative? Sometimes with young people, their behaviors don't match up often with what they really want people to see about them. So I'm just curious about whether or not you ever get into those dynamics.
Absolutely. When we have time. I mean, this is complicated. This is complicated stuff, right? Like these Story Circles, we have 90 precious minutes with these amazing young people. And so we have to be very, focused on what we can achieve in that time. Certainly in our longer term projects, we really get into that. I mean, we really dive into what are those perceptions, where do they come from, how do they impact you, how can you address it in the moment, how can you begin to chip away at those perceptions through your own actions, how can we help you tell the world who you are, how can we make that the message that's put out there. So it's a long-term process, and it's multi-pronged. I mean, part of it is working directly with the young people, part of it is working with the media. I appreciate you giving me the space today to tell this story and to kind of open people's minds to the power of story and make people question their perceptions, question the stereotypes that are put out there, and maybe think a little bit more thoughtfully or ask deeper questions next time. So there's a lot of levels to what we're trying to affect through storytelling.
Great. Well, I appreciate you taking the opportunity and the time to share with us, because when I had an opportunity to read through the website and to really look at a lot of the work and the projects that you have underway, I had to have you on the show. And I was thinking about the show and our focus on the justice system and reform and justice involved individuals, and thinking, wow, this is a mechanism that could be so directly beneficial to the justice involved population as well. And I'm very excited to have you because I'm learning a lot about the storytelling process, and like you said, the multi-pronged pieces to it. We're coming up on the end of our segment 1 on the Justice Beat, in which we're speaking with Miss Angela Zusman, founder and executive director of Story for All in Oakland, California. We're going to take a quick station break, and we will return shortly. You are listening to the Justice Beat radio show.
The Justice Beat is committed to providing timely and relevant information to the 1 in 3 Americans touched by incarceration. Do you have questions about your loved one's incarceration or need information on how to help your soon-to-be released loved one? Visit our website at www.justicebeat.webs.com and send us an email under the Contact Us tab. The Justice Beat is here for you. You are listening to the Justice Beat radio show. See you in 60 seconds.
Welcome back to the Justice Beat radio show, where our featured guest today is Miss Angela Zusman, founder and executive director of Story for All in Oakland, California. Miss Zusman?
Hello.
All righty. Welcome back. We are now on segment 2, and we're going to delve right into some of the meatier issues of the Story for All's project. And Angela, if you can share with us, I'm interested in learning a little bit about some of the communities that have been impacted by Story for All's framework through storytelling.
I can share with you a specific project that we're working on right now that's really exciting. I mean, we're really getting to implement this storytelling strategy in its fullest, which is so exciting to me. So just to set the context, we're working with partners from the ACLU of Mississippi, Mississippi Center for Justice, and Sunflower County Consolidated School District, other partners based in the Mississippi Delta. And this team has been charged with disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline. Is that something that your listeners are familiar with, or should I talk about the school-to-prison pipeline for a moment?
Take your time. I'm very familiar with it myself, but just in case we have listeners who are not, it would be great for you to kind of give us a little background on that.
Okay, great. And that's definitely something that would take hours to unpack, but the simple way to describe the school-to-prison pipeline, for those who haven't heard of that, is that there are certain school discipline practices that take place in schools all across the country, that the impact of those discipline policies is that students are pushed out of school and funneled directly into the prison system. This system exists. One way of looking at it is to note that the way that local prisons figure out how many prison beds to build is they look at their local elementary schools and they look at third grade reading scores.
You're on it.
And
Absolutely.
Based on the third grade reading scores, they can calculate how many prison beds they're going to need in that town, because they can kind of see how these kids are going to be pushed out of school and funneled directly into prison.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm oversimplifying an extremely complex system. If there's one thing I want your listeners to understand, is that this happens. It's systemic. It's intentional. And it's making it almost impossible for many of our youth in this country to not only not get the education they deserve, but it robs them, it deprives them of the opportunity to actually build stable careers, contribute to their communities, have stable families, and thrive. So this system is dastardly. It's got to be listed. I mean, people need to know that it exists, and ultimately it needs to be defeated and disrupted. So this is the task that this team in Mississippi has taken on. And what they understood was that in order to change a system, in order to do something so kind of intrinsic as changing the way an entire system operates, it's going to take more than policy change. Right? Like, policy change is absolutely critical. We have to change the policies that are happening at the schools. We have to change the policies that are happening in the courts and in law enforcement. But we also need to change people's perception. Agreed. Because if people continue to look at these students, and in particular young men of color, as dangerous threats who don't deserve to be in the classroom, then that's the way they'll treat them, regardless of what the policies state. Our piece in this project was called the Narrative Change Component. So our job was to lift up a different story by and about young men of color that will help to shift perceptions of the way that teachers, law enforcement, youth court judges, community members, and even the young men themselves, how they see themselves. Put out the authentic story that these young people they're valuable, they're assets, they're brilliant, they're wise, they need and deserve support. They shouldn't just be thrown out of the classroom, locked up in jail, or, as we discovered through this project, paddled, right, as they sometimes are for very minor infractions. So our work in this community has been lifting up the stories of these young men and then training them in oral history so that they could go out into their community and listen to the experiences and stories of other students, educators, law enforcement, judges, all of the people who are involved in the system. So in the course of this storytelling exercise, a few things are happening. Number one, we're lifting up stories. We're lifting up data that can be used to inform policies or set the stage for these policies. We're kind of getting the temperature of the community and finding out how people believe, what do they think, what's working, what's not working. So that's one aspect of this storytelling project, is lifting up the data to support these policy decisions. And then secondly, on a more subtle level, it's these young men who are out there conducting interviews. So, for example, when they interviewed the police chief was blown away. He sees this group of young men eagerly listening to him. They're having a conversation as equals, and they're finding multiple points of connection. So he walks away from the interview, maybe, feeling a little bit differently about these young men than he did before. So just the experience of the story sharing or the interviewing that happens really allows people to see these young men in a different light. And then finally, we kind of curate all this wisdom that the youth have lifted up in the community. We've produced an exhibit, a video, a data report that very artfully presents these community voices and this data and the images of the young people in such a way that a larger community can engage with the project, with the content, with the stories, and ultimately we hope that it helps to shift people's perceptions. And the evaluation we've done so far has shown that that's exactly what's happening. It really is helping people think differently about these young people, think differently about the school, therefore feel motivated to make systemic change, which takes time. So we need people to be motivated and feel a connection to the issue, and that's what this narrative change piece accomplishes.
Now, before we move on to the remainder of the questions in this segment, I want to recap something and ask the question. Now, did I understand that is this a pilot program that you're doing with the ACLU in Mississippi?
I'm not sure if it would be considered a pilot. I mean, it's the methodology. This is the methodology of Story for All. Okay. So this is the first time it's being applied within this partnership. I guess it's something of a pilot. The goal is definitely to be able to scale and replicate it.
Right.
So
that was my next question.
It is the first step on what is hoping to be a much larger project throughout the state of Mississippi and potentially beyond.
Right. That you answered the part B, because as I was listening to you give the description of the project and some of the outcomes, this is needed around the country. And you know, it is really needed around the country, and what a great place to implement it would be is what you're doing in the schools. I am beyond impressed. Our children really need an outlet. This is also an outlet for them to be heard, to be seen, to be listened to, especially with the rise of suicide among young people. This is a tremendous platform for them, and I applaud and commend your work.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right on. Young people have almost no outlets for creative expression. Supposed to sit in chairs all day long, being given information that oftentimes feels totally irrelevant. Sometimes they're hungry. Sometimes they're cold in these classrooms. I mean, it's just crazy what we're expecting these young people to do without giving them any outlet for expressing themselves. So that is a big part of the healing component of this work, or the healing pedagogy, is understanding that everybody has a voice, everybody needs an outlet, and that being able to tell stories through various means. We're not just standing up and delivering oral stories. We do writing, we do music, we use different art forms, we use oral history. So we're really kind of creative in how we harness the power of story and bring that into the class to young people. It's absolutely essential. We've just been doing a project here in Alameda County, talking to students and teachers about creativity and the arts and why that's important to them. And interestingly, the thing that came up again and again and again, and this is the young people telling us they need art in school for their mental health.
Yes. Yes, and I can attest to that.
That's what the kids are telling us.
Yes,
right?
For their mental health, right? Right, they're very much aware. Yeah. My son is 15, and he attends very well-known performing arts school here in St. Louis, Missouri. And I have always been a proponent of the arts. Sometimes, children will be exposed to the arts separate from academics. So they go to school and then they're maybe have an after-school activity that they're involved in. However, at my son's school, they incorporate every aspect of the arts into the academic process. So what is happening is they are not only learning content, but they're being given the opportunity to learn in the manner in which many students may learn, visually, artistically, aesthetically, hands-on opportunities. What you're doing then is meeting the needs and the learning style needs of all your students, and yet at the same time giving them that creative expression. Don't mean to sound like a commercial, but I could not have agreed with you more. Let's look at how these communities have been transformed through storytelling. What does the transformation process look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's something that is a long-term process. But I'll take us back to the Mississippi Delta, if you'll just come with me back there.
Oh, sure. Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah. All right, here we go. It's an amazing place to be, by the way. A big plug for the Delta. I'm so grateful for the welcoming spirit and the folks who are out there. And I can tell you that the transformation, some of it's immediate, some of it's very obvious. We can look at the 19 young men who participated in this project. The project, by the way, is called Roots of Sunflower County.
Roots of Sunflower County?
Yeah, Roots. And the guys gave it that name, the students in the program, they gave it that name. And Roots is an acronym, and it stands for Reclaiming Our Origins Through Story.
Wow. That is,
I know. I was like, that's so deep.
That is so on point. Exactly.
Right?
Okay. So here we go with that creative expression, creative mind. I mean, that's why we have to tap into these young people.
Exactly what they have. And also, I mean, they really were able to get the importance of digging into their past, knowing their history, listening to the elders in their community, understanding on whose shoulders they stand, understanding the progress that has been made as a means of motivating them for obviously the great progress that still needs to happen. I mean, I can give an example of that.
Please
we
do.
have there's in this town that we were working in, there's railroad tracks in the town that historically divided the town into half. And, we're standing actually walking on these railroad tracks as an elder from the community is telling us how when he was young, black people were not allowed to cross the tracks. Mm-hmm. literally not allowed, and that the library was purposefully built on the white side of the tracks so that black people couldn't go to the library. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman, his cousin, was actually arrested for going to the library. So we're hearing the story as we're actually standing on the railroad tracks, and these young men at this day and age are able to cross these tracks without fear of being thrown in jail.
Right.
So there's still extraordinary racism in the society that's an incredible burden on these young people. And it's also very helpful for them to see that progress has been made.
Whoa.
Because of the efforts of so many people before them, they can now cross these tracks.
Yes.
Okay, so they're starting off from a different place, and that motivates them to carry the mantle forward.
Exactly. You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say it's time to run now. It's time to run with that mantle. What?
Yeah, and they feel responsible. I mean, a lot of the young men that I speak with feel let down by the older generations. They say, you abandoned us. You know, how could you leave us in this way? There's an incredible intergenerational disconnect that is, you know, part of this systemic problem. And it's wonderful when we can lift up a different narrative about that, right? Like, you haven't been completely abandoned. People have been working blood, sweat, tears beyond your imagination to help bring you where you are today. And you now have a responsibility to keep that forward, to keep that moving forward.
I'm curious, okay, here we go again with inquiry. How are they defining abandonment, the intergenerational abandonment?
You know what, that's a great question. It's not something that we've specifically asked this group of young people, so I would have to give you an answer just based on research or speculation.
Right.
So I'm happy to go there, but it's not something that we've talked about specifically with them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because I asked the question because when you said that, I thought about a conversation I have had with cousins, even my son, and some of them have said, you know, you all didn't pass the history down. You know, sometimes when people have come up out of an oppressive situation or historically oppressive time frame, and they are now allowed to pursue some of the same aspirations and dreams, they tend to bury the history. And a lot of times it's buried because it's too painful to remember, or they don't want the children to know because they want them to kind of be free of that. So that's why I asked that question about how they define intergenerational abandonment. What does that look like? I'll be happy to, you know, here again, we have a lot of topics coming up out of this discussion, maybe show 3.
Yeah, and I would just say, just to wrap that point up, is that it goes both ways. You know, I've had elders in the community say to me, you know, we feel scared. We're scared of the young generation. We don't understand why they're wearing their pants like that, why they're all killing each other. We're scared of them.
Right.
And then we hear the youngsters saying, they've abandoned us. You know, why they teach us how to sell drugs, they teach us how to play dice. Why don't they teach us how to run a business?
Right.
Where are they?
Right.
So there's a lot of work to be done here. And again, I think this is part of a larger systemic oppression that has helped to create this intergenerational disconnect. So I'm not wanting to victimize people, but I just want to place it within the context of historical oppression.
That sounds like another listening circle between the older generation and the younger generation.
It's a big part of what we're trying to accomplish. Intergenerational oral history is something I'm especially interested in. You know, helping to create that link between the generations. It's been really meaningful in my life personally, and I see that it's meaningful and absolutely needed as our society continues to sort of break down and we don't have those multi-generational connections that we used to. So, yes, I have a lot more to say on that topic, and it's something that we think about a lot in this work at Story for All.
Okay, we got 2 more questions to get through in this segment before we go to our station break. So let's look at what does healing look like through the lens of storytelling?
Multi-leveled, again. I mean, there's the piece we already talked about, which is someone feeling that they have something of value to offer or to contribute. Okay. So this is, you know, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a basic human need.
Right.
We have to feel that we have something to contribute. And many people in historically oppressed communities have been led to believe that they have nothing to offer. So how do you go about motivating yourself or, you know, persevering often in very challenging situations when you've been told over and over again that you don't matter? And what happens as a result of this is something that's been termed identity foreclosure. So individuals or entire communities can feel completely limited in what they're able to achieve or even able to imagine as a result of the lack of hope or despair that results when generation after generation you're told that you don't matter.
Exactly.
So a huge piece of the healing is just about helping people understand that they have something that's valuable. They are valuable.
Yes, starting with themselves first. Yes, exactly.
Their experiences are valuable. And then as you dig a little bit deeper, you can find special things about individuals that are valuable that they can latch onto and find, oh, I'm really interested in this. Oh, I'm actually really good at this. Maybe I'm going to go investigate this a little bit further. So a big part of it for the young people is just having that space to discover their value. And then when they start listening to others, you know, being able to find points of connection, have their minds opened. That's one thing that the young people say again and again, that this project, this work has just opened their minds, right?
Right.
So they're learning new information. They're learning how to ask questions. They're learning how to reflect, how to do critical thinking. This is extremely empowering and extremely healing because, again, it's saying you have control over what you think. You have control over how you represent yourself, how you think about yourself. If you want to make something, you can do that. So that's a big part of the healing process. And then also at a community level, there's a certain level of community despair that can take place. And, you know, for example, in the Delta, when these young men are up there presenting in their full glory, the entire community is healed. The entire community is transformed and filled with hope.
There's
because
hope.
now they can feel pride.
Yes.
Instead of whatever shame they may feel, which comes as a result of multi-generational poverty and other things that a lot of these folks are facing. So it gives them hope. And, you know, we talk about love, we talk about hope, we talk about healing. Some of these things people say, oh, that's sort of warm and fuzzy, and how do you measure that? And is that really important? People really need jobs. And I'll say, yeah, people need jobs, but what does it take to get a job and keep a job?
Right.
You have to have hope. You have to believe that you can do it. You have to show up day after day, even when you don't feel like it. That's the inner strength that comes about through healing and through recognizing your own value.
Right.
And then, you know, being given the practical skills and tools and network to actually achieve your dreams.
And hope is also transferable, I believe, at some level. If you see, if you have had examples in your home where you saw people demonstrate that get up and go, the continue to do in face of adversity, the drive, maintaining their level of hope and optimism. But if you don't see that and you just see despair, it's hard to replicate that in the next generation.
Indeed, and we see that too in terms of crime, and it's why the school-to-prison pipeline and the fact that 1 in every 3 African-American men will spend time in jail. I mean, this is part of a system of oppression. So when you look at young people that are surrounded by violence or, you know, their father, their brother, their cousin, their uncle, all of them are involved in violent crime or incarceration, what does that make you think about yourself?
Right.
A lot of the young people we work with, they don't even think they're going to live to the age of 18.
Right.
So why should they graduate from high school?
Right.
Why should they go to school? You know, some of these young people, they have no food.
Yeah.
They need to eat, you know. They need to go out there and make money any which way they can. So we need to understand the context. We need to understand the stories. And we need to lift up affirmative stories, examples of people making it, to motivate others and show them you can do this. You may not have seen this before, but you're seeing it now, and this can be your story. How can we help you get there?
Wow, there's so much here to unpack. Can you highlight a story, a storytelling project that impacted you the most? Just you.
There's been so many. I'll think of one.
And if you want to, we need to take a break. And if you want to take a moment and think about it, and we can return to that thought on the other side.
All right. Very good. That's a good hook for your listeners. Come back for a good story.
All right. When we return, we'll be talking with Miss Angela Zusman, Executive Director and founder of Story for All. And she's going to give us some insight on one of her storytelling projects that impacted her the most. You are listening to the Justice Beat radio show. We'll return shortly.
Do you know of ground-level community or faith-based organizations who are providing outstanding direct services to formerly incarcerated individuals? Well, if you do, the Justice Beat team would like to recognize their commitment and dedication. Please visit the Justice Beat Radio Show website at www.justicebeat.webs.com and submit your recommendation. Don't forget to provide the name of the organization, the contact person, phone number, and email address.
Welcome back to the Justice Beat radio show, where our featured guest today is Miss Angela Zusman, founder and executive director of Story for All in Oakland, California. Before our last break, we were talking a little bit about one of the storytelling projects that impacted Miss Zusman the most, and that is where we're going to pick up at this segment, on this segment of our show, segment 3. Miss Zusman?
So a good story. This story happened within the context of one of Story for All's first projects, which came to be known as the Griots of Oakland. And Griots is spelled Griots, ultimately resulted in a book, exhibit, and some videos. Really amazing project. At the beginning of the project, and this is a partnership based in Oakland, the intention was to lift up the voices of African-American young men in Oakland, give them a chance to tell us who they are, and learn from them what they perceive as happening in their communities and what kind of support they need, what their successes are. So this was the project that we were doing, and there was one young man in the project. We had a group of about 20 African-American male high school students who participated in the project. And one of them, I will never forget him, so this is really his story. And I'll just call him Z for the sake of his privacy. Z, you can picture him, he's kind of a bigger guy, very boyishly handsome, around 15 years old, so he was sort of straddling that kid, young adult phase of his life, and you could really see that on his face. Lots of energy. He was one of the kids that came every Friday. We met every Friday, so he was real consistent. And over time, his story began to come out a little bit. We learned that he had 13 brothers and sisters, and his mother is blind, and there's no father around. So that was the first kind of eye-opener for me, like, wow, I can't even imagine that.
Right.
And then a few weeks into the program, he did not show up to class, which was rare for him. So we called him, and his voice sounded real not good. It sounded really monotone. So we asked him, Z, what's going on today? And after gently pressing him, he told us that the reason he wasn't there that day is because earlier that day, his best friend had been walking over to his house, and suddenly this group of guys started to chase him. And his friend ran as fast as he could, and he made it all the way to right in front of Z's house. But he didn't quite get in the door. Wow. And so right in front of Z's house, this group of guys tackled his friend and shot him in the back multiple times, killing him.
My gosh.
All of this Z witnessed happening in front of his own house. And at the time, of course, I was well aware of the statistics in Oakland that 1 in 5 high school students has personally witnessed a homicide.
You said 1 in 5.
But 1 in 5.
Okay.
But when you hear that number, it's very different than when you're talking on the phone with someone who has just witnessed their best friend being killed right in front of their eyes.
It puts it front and center.
This was a real wake-up call to me, and also another example of the power of story versus data, actually being able to hear and feel what he was going through. And it just went on from there. There was the boyfriend who came in the picture who was smoking crack, and then they blamed it on Z. Z ended up getting thrown in jail for this person's afflictions, and then finally he got out of jail. I'll never forget the last time that I saw him. He came to a class, and we were riding in the elevator together, getting ready to go our separate ways, and he was so excited. He said, Angela, I'm so excited to conduct my first interview. I've been preparing, and I feel like I'm ready, and that was something that was taking him a long time to feel ready, and he felt like he was there. And I gave him a big hug, and he walked one way, and I walked another way, and I never saw him again.
You never saw him again.
I knew that he had to move to a different town to go live with his sister. We tried to keep in touch through his sister, but we weren't able to. And it was incredibly eye-opening for me. I felt like I kind of had an idea of what was going on for these young people who lived right around the corner from me. And the truth was that I had no clue. I had no clue. I can thank Z. I can thank the other young men in this project. They literally burst the white privilege bubble for me. It really put me on the journey of understanding white privilege, feeling a need to do something about it, feeling even a deeper need to lift up the stories of these young men, to open people's eyes to what's really happening, the fact that we're living in different cities, even if we live on the same street, and just really inspired me to move Story for All in this direction in terms of supporting, in particular, young men of color.
Did I hear you say that you live in, close proximity to a lot of the kids? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Was that intentional?
Yes, it was. I wanted to. We just lived in the same part of town.
Great.
But it could have just been a different universe.
Right.
What I was experiencing as someone living in Oakland was completely different from what this young man was experiencing, even though he was living not far from me. And I think that's critical for us to realize. I think that white privilege is another topic that deserves a lot of time, and it's something that I think a lot about. I am Caucasian. I am white. I need to dig into my role historically in all of this and how I have imbibed these stereotypes and what that means for me. What's my responsibility? Mm-hmm. And so these young men have been compassionate in helping me to be on my journey of understanding there as well.
So this is a great segue in terms of the story that you shared to moving into looking at how or if you have ever explored implementing the concept of storytelling within the juvenile justice system.
Yes, We would love to. We've explored it. We've done all kinds of things. Hopefully we're going to be able to get something off the ground real soon. There are some complications with our methodology, in terms of being able to go in and really help record stories. There's just a lot of complications in terms of going into juvenile justice facilities and doing any kind of recording at all. Mm-hmm. So we've had to be real thoughtful about how these stories could be documented. Mm-hmm. We have to take into account the vulnerability of the young people who are incarcerated and understand that it may simply not be safe for them to be out there telling their stories in many ways. Mm-hmm. So there are certain aspects of the methodology that we really have to be very cautious of. On the other hand, this is a huge dream of Story for All. It's something that we're actively working toward, is creating an opportunity for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated youth and adults to be able to claim their narrative, claim their value, and really shift perception so that all people are seen as assets, that people are seen as worthwhile. That's part of how this justice or injustice system is such a big part of this system of oppression, is that when people are incarcerated, there's a huge amount of shame. I mean, not only are they not able to get jobs, places to live, vote, and all that other stuff, but there's this burden of shame. It's as if their crime or their mistake was the only relevant thing about them.
Right.
And we're really interested in being able to bring out the fullness in each of these humans. We've all made mistakes. Mm-hmm. Probably almost every single one of us could have gone to jail. maybe multiple times for stuff that we've done. And there's more to us than that.
Right.
And there's more to these young people than that. And it's critical that we begin to see them holistically and give them the opportunity to claim their own story.
And I wanted to, and we can talk a little bit more about this offline, but I do want to put a little bug in your ear that one way that you could work with the juvenile population, not necessarily those who are actually incarcerated, but those who have a justice-involved history. So, for example, many juvenile justice court systems are looking for programs for their alternatives to incarceration programs. So they may have families who are a part of their family court system with children who are in the court system, but yet they are still at home, but they have to participate in some type of alternative program. So there are many ways for you to get this program implemented involving those who have a justice-involved history but may not be incarcerated. And we can talk more about that, but go ahead, Angela.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you for lifting that up. And we would love to collaborate. We would love to collaborate. So if there's folks who are listening who are interested, please get in touch. And I can tell you two specific entry points that we're actively working on right now. One is working with Opportunity Youth. And Opportunity Youth is a name or a moniker that's been given to describe young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are out of school and out of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And many of these young people have been systems engaged at some point in their life. Mm-hmm. So that's a group that we're really interested in being able to lift up their story, particularly. And also, we're really interested in the moment of reentry.
Yes.
For folks who are coming out of incarceration,
Absolutely.
being able to lift up stories of how people have been able to navigate reentry, kids age out of some of these services. How are you expected to come out of incarceration and just be successful suddenly in the world when no one's helped you to do that ever before, and you have all these extra obstacles. So we're real interested in lifting up success stories around reentry as well as the challenges around reentry. We feel like that's a part of this system that we can have a really positive impact on through story.
You're on it. I can't wait. I cannot wait for you to get into the systems, because that's where it's really needed. It's really needed. Okay, great. So you've already answered my next question. So let's look at what have been some of the reactions of storytelling participants to their participation in your projects. Any salient takeaways or feedback?
It's incredibly positive. It's just astonishing. We have a 100% recommendation rate. We've got crazy, amazing positive impact in terms of people self-reporting increased confidence, self-esteem, communication skills, workforce development. We've got people saying, this has changed my life. This has changed the way that I look at myself, that I look at the world, that I look at my opportunities. everyone should do this work. Everyone needs to do this project. I mean, it's just been incredibly positive. So that's for the people who participate. We're also really interested in looking at the impact beyond the participants.
Okay.
So we're actually trying to sort of measure our impact in communities. Mm-hmm. How is it impacting a community when we're able to help amplify the voices of the youth in such a way? So we're getting a little bit more sophisticated in our evaluation. I'm actually pretty excited about that, which is a little bit I can geek out on you about evaluation, but I'll spare you and your listeners. What we're doing has never been done before. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to not only hone it, refine it, and get better at it, but also get better at measuring it. I can tell you that it's having a big impact. And one of the things that we were able to do for the first time in Mississippi was measure people's response to the exhibit that we created for the Roots Project.
Right.
And it was really exciting. We were able to see through this immediate evaluation that people filled out after seeing our exhibit that, yes, there was a huge impact on people's perceptions by viewing the exhibit and seeing the presentation with the young people. More than 30% of people reported an improved perception of African American young men just from a very brief exposure.
Wow.
So that's very, very heartening. And something like 87% reported that the exposure to these stories and these products made them feel hope for the young men in their community. So it's intangible things that we're trying to measure and impact, and yet we're seeing extremely encouraging signs that it's working. So,
and about how long does it take? How long does it take, Angela, to get through the exhibit?
This is a pretty small exhibit, so you could get through it in about 10-15 minutes.
Okay.
If you watch the video is 10 minutes, so that would take another 10 minutes. But we're not talking about a real long time.
Right. Okay. Just, I was
and
curious.
And obviously, it's not going to work for everybody. I mean, I want to put it out there. I'm not trying to say that you tell a few stories or you read a few stories and then suddenly everything's bright and cheery. And, it's not that simple. I think there are some people that are ready to question their perceptions. There are some people, they're kind of like the low-hanging fruit, that they're ready for this type of shift, and other people are just really entrenched in their views, and this isn't probably going to move them. So I don't want to falsely claim that this is the magic pill everyone can take. I can say, though, that we're seeing extremely powerful, positive impact on many people through this methodology.
I'm from the old school where a lot of people would say the eye gate, EYE. And you have 5 gates: the ear gate, the eye gate, the mouth gate, the nose gate, and I'm missing one of the gates. But the eye gate is one of the most powerful gates, the entry points to your spirit and soul. So that which we see often impacts us the longest. What goes in our eyes, whether it's the TV, whether it's media that we listen to, we have to be very careful. So I'm very encouraged by the exhibit's impact on people. Being able to see the exhibit obviously impacted them in ways that are just immeasurable.
That's really interesting you say that. And there's a data report, too, which we can provide a link to your listeners so they can see it. And it's another way that we incorporate art in this process, is that when we're producing these tools like the exhibit or the video or the data report, they're extremely beautiful. They're very, very high quality. And the reason for that is because the beauty, the artisticness of the products actually lowers people's defenses. It grabs their attention. And allows them to sort of take in the information on a different level.
Yes.
So I think what you're saying about the iPath is right on in this regard.
Yeah. I remember a lot of older people always being very sensitive to what you allow your children to see, what you allow them to listen to. And so it makes perfect sense that if you have a image that is able to change perceptions in a more positive leaning, that's going through the eyes and anything that they're able to hear auditorily. So I would love to be able to see the exhibit at some point. It sounds like a wonderful project.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something that we hear a lot. And I will send you a copy of our book, The Griots of Oakland, and that's something that anyone can get. It's on Amazon and it's widely available. And what we hear about that work, which is filled with really beautiful portrait photography of young men as they're telling their stories, And what I hear again and again from people in the exhibit again is just really, really beautiful. Great photographers have come in here and really captured beautiful stories in the way that they take pictures of these young men. And what we hear from them is young men saying to me, I have never seen someone who looks like me portrayed in this way. What respect they're being shown, even if it's not them in the picture, even if they're not the one up on the museum wall, to see someone who looks like them being honored in this way has an impact on the community. So that's something else that we're trying to achieve.
You're doing wonderful work, and I'm curious to know what's the next story for All? What are some of your upcoming storytelling projects you have planned?
We're looking at a really exciting project here in the Bay Area, actually. You may have heard about the gentrification that's happening in San Francisco and the fact that it's getting real expensive, and some of the communities that have been there for years are being pushed out. And so we're really excited about a new project where we're going to get to tell some stories about one of the oldest African-American communities in San Francisco, and lift up those stories, document them, and really document the impact of gentrification on the culture of the city through the stories of folks who've lived there for many years. That's also going to be an intergenerational project, so we're going to get young people out interviewing their elders to really dig into the culture and history of this city and how gentrification is impacting them personally and also San Francisco in general. So I'm really excited about that project, which is going to kick off this summer. And we're also, continuing the Griots of Oakland work here in Oakland. We're hoping to be able to continue the work in the Mississippi Delta. The exhibit will be traveling around the state of Mississippi all summer. Okay. I'll be heading back out there next week. The exhibit's opening at the Smith Robertson Museum in Jackson, and it'll then go to the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University, which is also going to be the archive for the oral histories. So for those of you in Mississippi or nearby, come out to Jackson. We'll be opening up at Smith Robertson. It'll be at the Margaret Walker Center for most of the summer, and hopefully it'll keep moving after that. So those are two of the big projects that we're working on right now.
Okay, excellent. Well, you brought us right to the last segment of our show. We're going to take a quick break. You are listening to the Justice Beat radio show. We will return momentarily.
You are listening to the Justice Beat radio show. See you in 60 seconds.
Welcome back to the Justice Beat radio show, where our featured guest today has been Miss Angela Zusman, founder and executive director of Story for All in Oakland, California. Ms. Zusman, we're going to take this last segment and recap some of the salient points of the show, any highlights that you want to leave with the listening audience, also information about Story for All's contact information, how to reach you, Twitter, Facebook, and then I will leave you with the last words for our listening audience. So if you might want to take a few minutes to kind of recap anything that you want to leave with your listening audience in relation to the storytelling project, why it's important, how to reach out to you to bring it to an area school. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think what I really want people to walk away from here is that everyone can take some action around what they've heard today, right? So the first thing is for you personally, think about what story are you telling? What stories do you have to tell? I mean, whether it's at the dinner table tonight or, at work or at a family gathering or with a friend, think about sharing a piece of yourself. Think about a story that you would like to tell, something about you or your family that you would like to pass down to future generations. Think about incorporating story in the way that you speak to people. Definitely the listening piece is huge. After we get off this, after you finish listening to this radio show, just notice how you listen when you're in the world. Next time someone is speaking to you, try to just focus on listening to them instead of silently planning what you're going to say, right?
Right.
You're saying anyway. Think about how you listen to people. That's something you can always offer. That's an act of generosity you can give at any time. It's actually listening to someone fully. Something else I'd really love for your listeners to do is look at their own bias, look at their own perceptions. We are all biased. We're all being bombarded with, very consciously crafted narratives that will lead us to certain perceptions and stereotypes. So I just encourage you to think about it, question that. Think about it. Next time you see a young black man in a hoodie walking down the street, notice how you respond. Notice how you feel and question it. Question where that is coming from for you. Pay attention to your bias. You can forgive yourself for having it. We all have it. Mm-hmm. And move on, right? Like, acknowledge that it's there and find a way to get beyond it. And then as far as, larger scale storytelling projects, we love to partner. We custom design our work to meet specific goals of the schools or the groups that we're working with. We're very eager to bring this work to different places around the country, and we would very much welcome your inquiry, your questions, your ideas. I suppose that you'll be giving our information about how to reach it.
Yes.
Via the website.
Exactly. Well, Ms. Zusman, I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today. I call it a conversation because you resonated on so many points with things that I've already embraced in my walk. But I'm also just enormously intrigued by the participation of the young people and your focus in Mississippi with the young folks. And I can only imagine visually what this would look like as a nationwide project. And giving our children a voice, that is what is missing. It's like the cry in the wilderness. We must stop and listen. And I thank you so much for the Story for All project. I thank you for your participation, and my Justice Beat listening audience, I thank you for taking time to listen to this very important show on reframing the narrative of communities of color. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Justice Beat. If you like what you heard and found the information useful, then support the Justice Beat radio show by spreading the word and telling a friend.